Right, okay. Something a bit different this week. So this is going to be the first in a line of debate series episodes. Cue flames. So what have we got this week? We're starting off with, well, where we've got to start off really. Our favourite player and kind of why we choose them as our favourite player. This, for this week's context, is going to be from the traditional Big Four. Probably no surprises as to who we're going to go with, but it will be explained in due course. So we're going to compare and contrast the main stats, and then we've got our list of kind of attributes in the mould of like FIFA. So we're going to choose, our 6 best attributes, tangibles and intangibles for these players. So let us start off with a bit of stats, just to bore you with the reasons why these players are so good in the first place. Let's start off with you, Merlin. So obviously introduce your player first, and then give us some of the main stats that they've had through their career.
It would be my pleasure, Ben. And I tell you what, it's no surprise with the player that I am picking, because I probably mention him maybe every 5 minutes of a podcast. I'm sure there's a statistic we could rubble up here, just to how many times I mention him. But he's always been my favourite. He was sort of the player I latched on to after Leighton Hewitt stopped winning as much. Big surprise, Leighton Hewitt used to be one of my favourite players when I first started watching tennis, but obviously the changing of that time, coming into the time of the Big Four, was very much underway then. And I obviously chose one of the Big Four. And no surprise, it's Andy Murray. Now, Andy Murray... Oh, you sound just like all the English people when he says he's Scottish.
Yeah.
Doesn't bother me, because I'm both anyway. Anyway, Andy Murray, quite an exceptional player, not quite always given the credit for, and this is why I always say the Big Three might be something of a disrespect. I understand why the Big Three is talked about all the time, the most Grand Slams and all of that sort of stuff. But if you look at most of the other metrics, most of the other methods of deciding who were the best players throughout that period of time, which is about 20 odd years, let's face it, then he is without a doubt Big Four. So some of the things that Murray has achieved in his career, he's won 46 singles titles, which still pits him at the top of that list. Not the very top, obviously, but just behind the Big Three. He's also won 3 Grand Slams, which is also during that period just below the Big Three. He's also won 14 Masters 1000 series titles. These are the much bigger titles, such as Indian Wells, for example. He did win that at one point. And interestingly, with the 14 Masters, he is the 5th most of these titles won for a single person's career since 1990. So that even beats the likes of Pete Sampras and whatnot. So, it's quite an impressive number of these Masters 1000 series titles. He's also won 2 gold medals at the Olympics, which is something that the Big Three even have never actually managed to do. And he also has 1 ATP Finals title in 2016, where he beat Novak Djokovic during what was probably Andy Murray's unstoppable year. He reached career world number 1 for obviously during that period, during 2016. I think overall he's had not only a very, very impressive career, but he's still on the tour after obviously undergoing severe hip resurfacing surgery for his injuries. He's putting in some impressive performances given that level of surgery. So, that's my 10 cents worth for Andy Murray.
Oh, no surprises there.
No surprises.
No. So, as much as I do respect that decision, obviously I'm going to go with a different choice of player. This was a man that got me into tennis, like you said. Well, you said Hewitt got you into tennis, but then obviously Murray has kept you in the game. This is a man that I've followed since I first started watching tennis. He was the first player I saw live at Wimbledon back in, I think it was 2005, 2006. Known for his grace and his elegance on the court, and considered by many to be the greatest of all time in that kind of debate that can get somewhat toxic, obviously, with everyone being very firmly entrenched with one player or another. And it's no surprises that this player is, of course, the Swiss maestro, Roger Federer. Just a few stats on the man himself. 20 Grand Slams, of course, 8 at Wimbledon. And at one point he won 5 Wimbledons in a row and 5 US Opens in a row. Not sure. Many players have done that at different Grand Slams, winning them in so many consecutive years. He's got to 31 Grand Slam finals. He has won 28 Masters events, getting to 50 finals. He's won 77 ATP Tour tournaments, getting to 115 finals. And of course, he's won an Olympics doubles title. He did get to the final of the Olympics in the singles. Obviously, he lost to your man, Andy, sadly, on that one. But in terms of ATP finals events at the end of the year, he's won 6 of them and got to 10 finals. And I'm not sure anyone has done better than that, even Novak himself. And of course, he was number 1 for a long period of time, especially during that noughties period when Nadal was sort of coming through to challenge him. 302 weeks at number 1, only bettered by Novak, and 237 consecutive weeks at number 1. And the mere career prize money earnings of $130 million, obviously not including all the sponsorship money.
Interesting you bring up prize money as well, actually, because if you again look at this list, another reason to justify the big 4, the only person behind the big 3 in terms of career prize winnings is Andy Murray.
Oh, do you know how much he earned?
I don't know the specific value. I'm sure I can find it very, very quickly.
Testament to his consistency, because obviously people would talk about Stan when they try and bring him in.
His career earnings were 62,600,000.
That's pretty respectable. Gotta say.
Obviously, pretty respectable.
Oh, even just like a 120th of that would be nice. But obviously we are talking about our favourite players today, so this was just a bit of kind of stats to bombard you with at the beginning, just to show you how good they are and to give Merlin's justification for putting Murray in the big 4, as some people will call it the big 3 and will just refuse to acknowledge Murray in the first place. Which
would be completely wrong and idiocy.
Oh, it's absolute disgrace, I tell you.
Quite right. Actually, no, quite right.
Right. So this is more of the attributes section that we're going to do, a la FIFA, that so many people are interested in these days. So what we're going to do is we're going to fire an attribute for our player, one by one. So we'll do one for our player, then the other person will do theirs. It's going to be tangibles and intangibles, so things like the normal shots that you can make in tennis, movement, that sort of thing, and then intangibles, things that you can't really measure, the things that kind of really draw us to the player and make
standout items.
Exactly. So I think the way we're going to do it is we're going to go with a tangible first, and then we'll go intangible, and we'll kind of mix it up that way.
Yeah, sensible.
Do you want to start us off with your first attribute and the rating that you've given to this attribute?
I will indeed start you off. I think the first attribute I've got to go for Andy Murray is his returns. The returning capabilities of Andy Murray is unparalleled in the game, except by one man potentially, Novak Djokovic. Funnily enough, they were both trained at the same time in the same Spanish academy when they were younger. So they're actually good friends, or at least I hope they are good friends, as they have obviously played a lot of their tennis life together. So when they compete, there's always that sort of brotherly love you can notice on the court. But no, interestingly, when it comes to his returns, it's one of the things that Andy Murray has always been very, very good at. And it's a very scary thing, especially when you're a big server and your game relies on serves, coming up against someone who's known for returning, because that's quite a skill in itself. And because normally the serve, of course, is something that the reason that we change serves each game is because obviously it's the advantage. If you're serving, then you obviously have an advantage. So I think with returns, I've gone with a rating of 95 out of 99. Now, that's quite a high rating. I'll tell you the reason why. He was the best at it. There is no player that was better at it. And if you're going to ask me to say anyone that was better at it, like I say with Novak Djokovic, He was only as good. I would never say that he was better than Andy Murray when it came to returns, which is why I've given him that rating. But yeah, like I say, I think he takes the shot specifically a lot further in from the baseline than a lot of players would. That second serves against Andy Murray, you've got to put a lot on it in order to make him flinch in any way. And when it comes to first serves, he'll still take it nice and early. It's something that actually you would probably like to replicate in your game, Ben. You like to take things early up on the baseline. Andy Murray takes it to a whole new level, taking time away by just a few extra centimetres closer to take on that serve.
Okay. Did you say 85 for return?
95.
95, okay. Yeah.
I'd call this one of his superpowers. In terms of a tangible skill of Andy Murray's, that's his superpower.
Okay. I'm going to return your return.
Oh, very nice.
A serve. So, actually, I think this may be...
So the wrong way round, but well done.
Yes. Normally, I think people would probably jump to maybe the forehand with Federer as his strongest attribute, but I think his strongest attribute in terms of tangibles was actually his serve, and I'm going to give it a rating of 92, which actually maybe should be higher given that you've given 95 for Murray's return, but I think obviously he didn't have the most powerful serve, but the placement of his serve was, I would say, as good, if not better, than pretty much any player that I've seen, which is a big call, but I know we've got a lot of big servers out there, like Isner and I don't know, every tall player you can name, basically, Karlovic, etc. Yeah. But one of the reasons Federer was so good on grass was because of his serve. How many 3 points he could get off the serve. Doesn't necessarily have to be aces, just inch perfection, licking the lines every time. Often he'd go through games just firing them down the tee out wide, and the game would be done in like 40 seconds, 50 seconds, and then it'd pressure straight back on the other player, even with all these good returners around. Just the different kind of spins that you put on the ball. Obviously, the slice with the wide serve is the one that stands out. But yeah, I think for me, the serve is probably his best attribute and is why he won so many Wimbledon titles. So yeah, that is my number one attribute for the Fed. 92 for serving. So, let's move on to an intangible. So, what have you gone with for your first intangible attribute for the man Muzzer?
Well, I think it's got to be one of his tactical things. And I think that you can probably see this coming. Anyone that knows Andy Murray's game can probably see this coming. The word starts with a G, it's 5 letters. It's his grind. And the reason I've chosen his grind is because this is the very reason Andy Murray needed hip resurfacing. I'm very sure of it. He doesn't give up on a point. He loves a hard workout. He loves a battle. He loves something to really get stuck into. He doesn't make the mistakes. He makes the other person make the mistake. And that's a great way to play your tennis. It's a great way to show your consistency. And consistency, as I've said said before in previous podcasts with sort of junior players, very important as they're climbing up. I think he's a great player to set that example. So I think this is his superpower. I've given him a rating of 90 for it because, given his emotional side of things, I think, even Andy Murray will sometimes go for too much sometimes. I've watched a few matches where he's gone for a few too many drop shots that haven't worked, simply to try and end those points a bit sooner, even at the height of his career. But like I say, I think that grind is one of his best attributes, specifically because it also gives a good example as a role model to younger players.
This is very much aligning with our styles of play that we use. So yes, okay, my first intangible, probably not a surprise, is going to be elegance.
Oh yeah.
Great.
So you say it aligns with your style of play?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Hey, my coach there was a bit like Federer. I'll take it. I mean, I'm nowhere near as good as him, obviously, but yes, elegance, and I'm going to give it a rating of 96. Try and argue with that. I think of any player, again, any player that's played the game, I would contest anyone saying that there was a player more elegant or graceful on the court than Federer. I think Dimitrov now, he he can reach a level, somewhat close to that, but people then tend to call him like baby Fed or an imitation of Fed. So that pretty much says it all, really. I think that's what made one of the intangibles that made his rivalry with Nadal so good was just the sheer contrast in style. His elegance versus Nadal's, brute, raw, kind of like bull type athleticism and the grind that he put in. That was one of the things that made that rivalry so great, and that's one of the reasons why I started playing tennis, because it just looked cool, and I was like, I want to try and look like that when I'm on the court. So that's my number one intangible attribute for Murray.
Brilliant.
Okay, on to another tangible then. What's your second one for Muzzer?
Well, you chose serve for Federer, and I'm going to choose it for Murray as well. And I'm going to compare it very similarly to you. I'm not going to give it the same rating that you gave. It is a lower rating, but I still think that this was one of Andy Murray's weapons, specifically on the grass. So the amount of times, obviously Wimbledon being the Grand Slam that Murray has won twice, the amount of times that Andy Murray has used his serve so effectively, 3 points, going a whole game, basically, I think it's the beauty of the consistency of his second serve that partially leads me to this score, but also the fact that sometimes it's not always entirely on. There are some matches where his serve percentage hasn't been perfect, specifically first serve percentage. So this is why I can't go too high with the score. However, I still think it was quite a good weapon, and especially that second serve where it starts off backhand and then curls into the body. On the grass, very effective. And I think that Andy Murray has won a lot of points out of that, combining it with his grind mentality. But the score I'm giving him is 85 for this one. So obviously not terribly high, but still quite the weapon. And it would be too easy for me to say forehand or backhand with Andy Murray. But I don't think there was anything too stand out about those shots. It was how he used those shots for the tactics he was going for. And as I say, that grind mentality.
I think when his serve was on, that was when he was like right at the top of his game. I remember his first serve was absolutely brutal. When he beat Federer in that first Olympics final, his serve was just unplayable almost.
It's the placement.
Yeah, and when he did get his second serve kind of act together, again that just kind of solidified his game even more, and there was just no way you could almost attack him because players would obviously target the second serve. And then if that was firing, there was basically just nowhere to go.
But if we think about it as well, just to continue on that route, with his serve, I've not seen a player master the throw up the way he does it the same way. Because Andy Murray does not throw the ball straight. He does not throw it straight up. He throws it in a curl. So there's a loop that the ball goes over him, and he just knows the exact contact point in which to hit it. Very hard to master, and it's something that as a coach I would teach out of someone rather than give that to someone.
Curl the ball in the toss, is that even possible?
Have a look.
Okay.
Have a look. The ball is moving across the front of him as he serves.
Alright, I'll have to look into that. Okay, so second attribute, tangible one for Federer, I'm going to go with volleying. So yeah, very much fitting with his general style of play, the serve and volley, obviously very handy on the grass. And it was sort of that transition from the previous era of serve and volleying into this kind of modern era of baseline game. Federer has kept this kind of serve and volleying style of play alive pretty much through the modern game. Still something I think could be used a bit more often. I do see it used more frequently on clay, and I see obviously Nadal using it more often now, obviously to cut points short. But for me, Federer's touch on the volleys is just something ridiculous. It got him out of so many difficult points where these players are so good at passing shots these days, and he was just so close to the net, and his reactions were spot on. You see it in the in the Laver Cup doubles as well. It's just he could have had his own career as one of the best doubles players of all time.
Probably,
just because his volleying is so good. I'm going to give it a 92 rating because I think just below his serve, that's his second strongest attribute I would go with.
I think that his volleying is also one of the reasons for his longevity throughout his career. The ability for him to then use that to cut points short and vary things up against different opponents as well to maintain consistency on a tour, adapting your tactics per opponent as well. Yeah, I'd agree with that and that rating.
Okay, next intangible then for Murray.
The next intangible for me is Andy Murray's underdog mentality. So at the beginning of Andy Murray's career, he was very, very good at losing the first set and then going on to win a match, which I think was quite an impressive statistic. But there was something about Andy Murray's mentality, and again that need for a battle, that meant that during a match, when Andy Murray was down, he'd play some of his best tennis. And I think that that's a great mentality to have. The problem is, I think maybe in his early stage of in the early stages of his career, he may have relied on it a little bit too much, and it did make for painful watching. You'd know he'd lose that first set. You'd have to watch the suffering in order to then enjoy the win maybe later on. Obviously, that didn't lead to all of his successes, and it was something that needed to become part of the wider picture later on, especially under Lendl. But yeah, that underdog mentality is something that I think Murray has done very, very well.
Of course you've gone with mentality. Yeah, it's fair. I mean, you even see it now with him coming back from injury. That is very much an underdog mentality. Like, no one really expects him to. Well, hardly anyone expects him to be able to come back and compete with top players. And
that's why he wins those matches. Because once you start to discount Murray, that fuels him. That's what gives him the drive to go into those matches, give it his all, and come out with a really good result. And some fantastic tennis.
He used to wind himself up as well, didn't he? Into that kind of mentality.
Yeah. Let's ignore that. But anyway, the score I gave for that was an 80. And that's the main reason, actually, that I've given the 80 is because, sometimes that underdog mentality would lead to him getting more pissed off with himself than it was functional and useful in order to win the match. Because if you come up against a strong, consistent player that's on their game that day, it's quite hard to come back from that.
I might have given him slightly higher, but that's a good point. It did take a lot of energy out of him in his earlier career days. Okay, intangible number 2 for Fed. I'm going to go with fashion sense.
Oh, God.
Of course, I can do what I want. It's fine. Fashion sense. We'll go with it. And I try and argue with it. I'm giving him a 95. Obviously, this is going to trigger people so much. Everyone's got their own idea of what looks good on a tennis court, but for me, it's simplicity. The simplicity of his style. He usually just go with 2 main colours. One with the headband and the t-shirt. And Nadal sort of does this now as well. Actually,
yeah.
Actually, he's kind of his fashion game. I think is up to a few levels.
Well, they had similar sponsors at a point.
Yes, don't mention that. Obviously, Federer now with Uniqlo, which I feel like his Nike stuff might have been better.
Nicer.
I do remember buying some of his Nike merch, but Uniqlo is still nice, good materials and stuff. But yeah, for me, it's again, it fits in with his overall style of game. It's the artistry and what it's like as a visual kind of entertainment for the crowd. So I've given him a 95 for fashion sense. Not sure Murray would be competing on that front, no offence.
Oh, I think that you say that, but Andy Murray has brought out his own brand of sportswear, which I would argue is quite lovely and quite fashionable. He says, as he's wearing a little bit of Andy Murray Castore, I'm not advertising for them. But nonetheless, I think some of that shows obviously the fashion sense is up there. But for me, I can't argue that Andy Murray's a fashion sense guru. I'll tell you who I think is a fashion sense guru, and that's Stan Wawrinka. You've seen the shorts on him over his career. I would love to know how he plans that, whether he's involved in a design concept or whether someone just goes, oh, how about this crazy pattern? And he just goes, yeah, go on then.
I think it literally just takes whatever they give him. I remember the French Open that he won in 2015, those were iconic shorts. Possibly the most iconic in tennis history, apart from the really short shorts they used to wear. It was a tablecloth design.
Yeah. I really liked it. I would have happily had a pair of those.
Absolutely brilliant. Okay. So we're into the last 2 now. So the last tangible attribute we're going for Andy.
The last tangible attribute. Well, I've had to go for movement. And I'll tell you why, that's part of the reason his returns are so successful, because it's all about making that return and then being ready for whatever comes back. Because that return, whether it's the strongest or not, as long as you place it well so that you've got the time to move to where you need to be, it's that forward thinking, that chess 3 steps ahead planning that makes his movement so successful. It's also what makes him so good at the grind. And it's also what's given him the injuries. But even now he's come back from the injuries, his movement, I would still argue, is better than half of the people on the tour, even with that resurfaced hip. Like I say, the speed with which he can sprint to a ball, the anticipation, that will never to give up, that always to keep that split step going, even when that smash is coming and you don't know where it's going, he seems to anticipate it freakily well. But even when he doesn't, there's still that intensity to it, which I think, again, is really good to see for younger players coming through.
Still think his quads are a bit big, though.
Yeah, but that's why the movement's so good. And that's why I've given him an 89. I've given him an 89 mostly because I think that last 10 points would be if he didn't get so injured from it.
Yeah, fair. All of these are caveated by the fact that he has now injured himself doing these things. But...
Quite right, yeah.
Okay, my last tangible one, probably an obvious one. I'm going to go with the forehand. I'm giving him an 88 on this. I don't know whether that's too kind or not. It's definitely not quite at the level of the serve and the volley, but when it's firing, that forehand, his ability to just take it earlier than like most players, and therefore giving the opponent like no time to set himself to react, is definitely one of his best attributes, especially on the grass and on like the quicker hard courts. That forehand, he obviously would run around it, get it into play as often as possible. You see a lot of players doing that more often now, getting that forehand into play and then just dictating points from there. Just the ability to take it early, which is very difficult, because being able to time it when you're taking it that early, off, like not far off the bounce, is one of the toughest skills.
On the rise, as it were.
On the rise, yeah. So I'm giving him 88 for that forehand. Yeah, so that's the last tangible one. All right.
Very good.
And intangibles, the final one. What are we going with?
The final what attribute that I'm going to go for, where I'm allowed to pick anything completely random, I've got to go with Scottishness. And the reason I've chosen Scottishness is because it plays into his character. It plays into everything that made Andy Murray so watchably unwatchable. And that's exactly the phrase that you need to use for this, because if you've ever watched Andy Murray give an interview, it's like watching paper. There's nothing to it. It's just like, I hit a ball and he hit it back and I won the match. That's it. And that's all you would get out of him. And that's because he was so Scottish, I think. That lack of flair, that just, you can just talk about it. It's just like, why asking me the question? That, why bother? Why bother? You've seen the match. You know what happened. Why ask me? I think that was part of it. But also the fact that, he's so active in terms of, as a player, he's so emotional on court. Like, you get entertainment out of watching him so raw and open on the court emotionally, much like Rafa was in terms of his skill, but with Andy you very much get the whole picture, which I think is really good. And again, it was so helpful to watch someone go through that process so vocally and so openly, without going into tantrums like, say, Nick Kyrgios, or tantrums like Serena Williams, all these players that have had code violations and things because of it. All that would come out of Andy Murray's mouth is just him shouting at his box in a very Scottish accent, or him shouting at himself. It was never about the other player. It was always about himself, which is exactly how the criticism should be when you're playing a match. So that's why I'm giving his Scottishness a 99. Because you can't possibly get more Scottish than Andy Murray on the tour. Plus, there was no one quite like him. And then there is no one quite like him. Because I think
you can take the man out of Scotland, but you can't take the Scotland out of the man.
Quite right. And also, he was very keen for Scotland to leave during the last independence vote as well. He made that very vocally clear, so that shows his true Scottishness.
Yeah, it's actually interesting when you talk about the interviews, because I think he actually has become better and more open with the interviews.
Way more better these days.
I remember, I think one
More
of the
better?
turning points was more better. One of the turning points was that Wimbledon final when he lost to Federer just before the Olympics, and when he like burst out crying.
And you saw the
Everyone was
tears,
like,
yeah.
he is a human after all.
Oh, I was crying with him.
Yeah. And then since then he's just a lot more like open in his interviews, but actually still in a Scottish way, because he's still like brutally honest. He no filter, doesn't hold back.
He doesn't cut around it, and especially when we had all these issues with women's equality and fair play in the sport, and he certainly became a champion of the men's side of the tour, what men should be saying and what these players should be, how they should be reacting, which I thought was really good.
Yeah. Okay, so you've gone with Scottishness for your last one. I wasn't entirely sure what to go for, so I've gone for sexiness.
Oh, God.
Yep. Hey, remove the toxic...
That's just Scottishness, right?
Yeah, same thing.
Just a different word for it, right?
Looks up dictionary synonyms. Sexiness, Scottishness. Yeah, so remove your toxic masculinity, okay? Sexiness it's an attribute we can have now. It's fine. Yeah, I don't really know what to put, to be honest. I've given him an 84 for sexiness because it fits into the overall, package of his style of play. And still at the age of 40, still, rocking the looks, the long flowing hair, the headband, obviously the great fashion sense. I think, it's just something a bit different from what you normally see from tennis players. And I think he's kind of promoted that somewhat through his career. It's now like you see all the players kind of, everyone's got a look almost. Like
the presentability.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to have an identity if you're the figurehead for anything.
Yeah, and obviously helps you like build your kind of allegiance of fans as well. It's all part of the brand or whatever. So yeah, I've gone with sexiness for that one.
Okay, I'm sure his wife would agree.
Yes, obviously I don't mean it in that way, but in an admirable way.
Okay.
Anyway, what have we gone for our overall score then? Our overall, what we call it, I can't call it a FIFA rating. It's a tennis rating of such.
It's that overall rating out of 100. It's sort of like the average, I suppose, of the 6 scores we've done. Although I'm not sure that this actually is an average. I haven't worked it out properly.
Doesn't have to be.
For me, the overall score for Andy Murray is 92. And I'll tell you, the reason for the 92, which might be actually a little higher than the average of the 6 that I've gone for, I think it's that, again, it's that longevity throughout the career. It's the story we've had with Andy Murray as well. Like I say, the underdog mentality, rising to becoming a true British champion, Sir Andy, all of the hip resurfacing, and the tragedy of the injury, and then coming back to sort of that underdog mentality where you just don't know if he's going to win another title again. And I wouldn't put it past him that he very much could. Like I said, I think not only is that story part of this part of why that rating's so high, but I think it's also obviously those elements. He was and is a fantastic tennis player, and I'm just happy that we can still watch him play.
I think that's a fair enough rating. I mean, ultimately, it's why he's your favourite player, so you can do whatever you want. I've gone with 94. I don't know whether that's being maybe too harsh or too kind. I don't know, but I think
overall, that's fair given my 92. Actually,
yeah. I think if you've gone with 92 and 94 is probably fair enough. Mainly, obviously he's the player that got me into the game. His stats speak for themselves. His overall style of play, the number of incredible matches over the years. Obviously, the Wimbledon 08 match against Nadal stands out, even though he lost it. But then that 5-set match in the Aussie Open as well. I remember when he came back from the knee surgery against Nadal. And he's, like a lot of the top players, evolved his game somewhat over the years. Obviously, everyone's got their own style, but he had to adjust his game somewhat on the backhand side as well. And I think he's just, all of these things together, the grace, the elegance, just the drive for improvement, has made him, in my opinion, actually the greatest of all time, because I don't think it's necessarily something that's measured on stats specifically. I think it's why do you watch tennis, and like what makes you watch the game, and what makes you want to go and play the game. Ultimately, for me, is what makes them the greatest. So that is my rating for the Fed. All right, that is the end of it. I mean, it wasn't really a debate. It was more like a head-to-head. I might call it head-to-head, actually.
It was a head-to-head. I think in terms of a debate, it's hard for us to disagree. We're both tennis fans. We both love both players, I would say. But we've just chosen our favourites.
We've literally gone for opposite attributes in like pretty much everything.
It's funny because that does reflect some of the game that we actually play out on the court.
Yeah.
You know I love a little grind. You know I love some heavy deep topspin. Very much the consistency that I teach and preach with the juniors. So
yeah. All right. Thank you very much for watching this kind of slightly different episode this week. Obviously, if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc., then give it a follow. On YouTube, give it a like, share it around, and subscribe if you are new. And we'll see you in the next one.